scent from the flowers as well. Interesting plant. The leaves have a very sort of strange, sort of potatoey type scent to them, so rather sort of contrast to the lovely, beautiful, sweet scent you get from the flowers. But they're quite an impressive flower, quite a large flower, and a really good plant. But you just got to be careful with the clerodendrons because they do tend to sucker. You'll see them sort of appearing up the other side in amongst the skinnier there, so they will literally sort of run through everything. So you need to keep them under control, but you can just chop the roots off and just clump them back together again. So, but a beautiful plant, lovely colour to the new fresh growth as well this time of year. Clerodendron trichotomum. It has this fantastic scented flowers at this time of the year. Beautiful scent, really nice scented plant, but also has the lovely blued seed pods, the calyx, that form later on in the year. So once you go through later on into the autumn, you get these lovely little blue seed pods which really stand out, especially as the leaves start to drop and you get the autumn colour again from the leaves. Again, as with all the clerodendron, it does tend to sucker everywhere, and you'll see just sort of running through the camellias on the other side. So you have to literally get in there, just chop a few of those roots out and pull them back, just to keep it under control. But as you see, it can make a lovely form, lovely shaped tree, given a little bit of space. But a beautiful this time of year, as I say, with the scent, and then those beautiful seed pods that follow on. And these are coming off the Hoheria. This is Hoheria sexus stylosem. You'll see another one a bit further along in the label. For anybody who wants to find out a bit more information, commonly called the ribbonwood, comes off in a great big sort of strips, the bark. Grown in New Zealand, it is a bit more sort of a sort of southwest speciality. At Rosemore, a couple of winters ago, they lost their whole collection of Hoheria through the winter. It has survived quite happily in Cornwall, but you've got to be a little bit careful outside of the southwest. Fantastic plant for interest at this time of the year. We'll get quite large, as you can see. We've got some smaller ones, and we'll see those down on the evergreen azalea bank further down in the garden. But as I say, a lovely tree for interest at this time of year. Lovely sort of a more open form to the tree as well. So particularly nice if you've got a sort of open space, a large sort of grass area, and you've got it sort of standing with one specimen in amongst sort of grassy area, then you can actually see it from all the way around. But yeah, really good for interest at this time of year. It used to be mostly planted up with camellias, and we've cleared the area to make it more of a sort of open area with a mixture. We've got some ginkgo and some lovely magnolias. Magnolias are interesting at this time of year as well. If you just hang on there a minute, I'll grab one of the seeds. They're interesting for their seed pods. Many of the magnolias will have quite striking seed pods at this time of year, and you'll often see them sort of splitting open with sort of ripe seeds inside. So they can be interesting for, obviously you get the lovely colour in the sort of spring, but also you get this sort of interesting seed pods, and they look quite interesting as the leaves drop off later on in the season as well. So the magnolias will fill this area in time, mixed in with a few other interesting plants. I was just really going to talk about some of the techniques for planting and protection of plants. You'll see these cages that we put around the plants and the trees in this area. It's just to give them a little bit of protection from machinery, for one. We don't have a great problem obviously with rabbits in the garden. We do have squirrels, which these act as a little bit of a deterrent. But we were just talking a little bit about slugs and snails, and obviously the invasion we've had this year with it being so wet. We've had a real problem with magnolias in particular, with them getting eaten by slugs and snails, especially in the spring when you get that flush of new growth. And what we've trialled in the garden is, if you were to look down at some of the bases of some of these, they've actually got just spiral tree guards with some copper tape. You can actually buy this online, off the internet, buy it in rolls, just stick it onto the actual plastic guards themselves, stick them right down to the ground level, so obviously the slugs can't get in underneath them and scale the actual trees themselves. And it has actually had a pretty good success rate. The plant in question is actually Ageratina ligustrinum. It used to be Eupatorium ligustrina, but now they've changed it. So it's actually called the incense bush. if you want the common name. Fantastic, obviously, for the smell. That lovely scent as you came along the path is all from these. They tend to be brought out by the moisture in the air and a bit of rainfall as well. It seems to, whether it gently caresses them, it brings a lovely scent out, because you don't really smell them by just, you imagine by squashing the leaves you get the scent, but it's just brought out by the oils that is brought out of the leaves. But obviously fantastic for butterflies at this time of year, good for later flower and interest in the garden. It is a bit on the tender side, but does grow down in the southwest. Going to plant in here a collection of bulbs as well, mix in some spring and winter flowering bulbs, lots of cyclamen, probably a few of the dwarf narcissi, just to get a bit of colour in here at different times of the year as well. So it'll be a sort of woodland glade with the wildflowers flowering in amongst the trees. So it's a sort of mixture of the two, and obviously the scent as well from the Adriatina. I always like just to bring group down to this area, because it's, in my time I've seen this area change a lot. It used to be rhododendron, ponticum and laurel, with a very narrow view through where the daffodils flower now. And we've opened this area up a lot and put more aces in here. And it's one of my favourite views or vistas into the garden. Looking over the Chilean coombe, you've got a fantastic range of plants and trees in particular. Obviously you're looking out over. At different times of the year you'll pick out particular sort of interesting trees. Obviously you've got the Davidia in May, you've got the big Magnolia Campbellii sort of mid-February. And other trees of interest at different times of the year, and obviously the rhodies that come into flower in the spring. So it's a real sort of nice area to pick out, I'd say, some of the wonderful trees. You've got the big, you've got the Jebuina avellana, the Chilean hazel, which we'll see in a little bit, which is flowering just off the left-hand side. You've got some lovely magnolias. You've got Magnolia rostrata with the large leaves on the other side, which really stands out, given this sort of very open view into the garden. So sometimes space can be such an asset, and it's something that this garden has. Over time, it has basically taken over. You can see the laurel behind us. It doesn't do an awful lot for anybody. It obviously does help protect the garden, so we've got to be very careful, obviously, not to reduce the shelter down too much. But sometimes you realise that you don't need as much, and that's what we've done in a lot of these areas. And I'd like to work through this bank off the left-hand side of us and take out more of the laurel, clear the areas, and then it gives us a nice planting areas and planting opportunities for some other trees and more interesting plants in the garden. So we're gradually taking back what has been light up at different times of the year. We've obviously put the new path in around the Chilean coombe, and we've done some planting, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But there are other areas we'd like to work on, and small areas of improvement and just clearing around, making more space. We've cleared through all of the laurel in this lower bank that used to obscure the bottom section. We planted in 3 big corners in there, which will give a really good sort of colour interest through the spring, summer, and even into the autumn with the fruits. So as I say, watch this space. We've got lots of bulbs we're going to be putting in again this year. I talked about the glade, the Acer glade. We'll be planting lots more bulbs around that area as well, and you'll see those come alive over the next few months. Once you move through into autumn, you'll have the cyclamen. Once you move through into sort of November, December, January, the cyclamen coombe in particular, obviously the snowdrops, and all these sort of areas will sort of light up at different times of the year. We're going to be doing quite a bit more work in through the bamboozle and just taking some of the plants back. Some of them have started to grow towards and into each other. So the bamboozle is a collection of bamboos, but we're trying to keep them segregated and separated so you can see the difference between the different varieties, different species of bamboo. This is one of my particular favourites. We planted this one now probably about 3 years ago. This is Borinda luciensis, a newly introduced bamboo, and you can't really buy it commercially very easily at the moment, but I'm sure it will become more available. But we actually got this, or I actually purchased this from Carwinian Gardens, which has the national collection of bamboos, which is just down the road. Fantastic bamboo. You can see this lovely form to it, these new shoots, and the lovely blue plume that they have on the bloom on the actual stems. They give it a lovely colour. You can see it sort of shoots up through the middle and then has a lovely sort of weeping form. But obviously, word of caution with any bamboos is given the right conditions and they will run. Unless you go for a specific, like something like Phylostachys nigra, the black stem bamboo, which is slightly more slow growing and more sort of a pachymorphic, they call it, which means it basically is a very tight clump forming bamboo. So a lot of them will run. You often see in people's gardens, in particular where the soil is not particularly good, rather than sort of bed in and produce a type of clump. They'll actually run along the surface and then keep running along the surface. The trouble with the bamboos, if you cut them off thinking you're going to kill them by cutting them off, all they do is they then send another runner out and go back up again. It's a natural instinct for them to just keep moving underground if they're disturbed on the surface. So you really need to be very careful. You can buy barrier to put around bamboo, so if you're really keen on having bamboo, you can buy a bamboo barrier which is about 1 metre deep, which can be buried in around the actual basic root of the system, and then it will stop it pushing out, and it will just try and grow up and over, and you can just chop the tops off. So you can grow them, but just be cautious of whichever particular variety or species of bamboo you do buy. A particularly nice one, we're going to add some more. We're actually going up to Kew. We've got a little mini expedition up to Kew. Ray Townsend, who's the Arboretum manager at Kew and one of our garden committee and council management, has kindly offered, when they actually split and divide theirs at Kew, for us to take some material from those. So a little expedition up to Kew to collect some new species and varieties to add to the collection in the bamboos itself. We've cleared quite a large portion of this Sata palmativa nebulosa, this large leaf bamboo. It was probably planted around about the 1950s, so it was quite an established stand of bamboo in the garden, but it's kind of taken over. The trouble with this particular bamboo is it tends to fall over itself, and then you get it really growing up through the middle and falls over itself, so it tends to be just a matted mass of leaves and stems, which looks a little bit untidy through the year. So we decided to remove a large portion of it. We took away probably about 10 tons of bamboo from this area. So it's a pretty sort of nightmare task. We did have, fortunately, had a mini digger in to do all the work, so it saved an awful lot of backache. But we still had to get rid of the material, because if you just leave one section of root in, it will just shoot away from that root again. It'll come back up again. So we've left the portion over on the other side, put a bamboo barrier around it to contain it. And what we're going to do is we're going to plant in probably 3 or 4 different species of coloured stem bamboos, and some of those we'll select from up at Kew, so we'll bring some of those down with us as well at the same time to form a lovely sort of 3 stands. And again we'll segregate them, we'll keep them separated with the barrier, just to stop them growing into each other. So they'll form these lovely sort of stem sort of interest in this particular area, because it is a good sunny spot. So with the coloured stem bamboos, you really need a good bit of sunshine to get the colours coming through in the stems. You can see behind us a good example. You can see the ones in the foreground. I've got the lovely yellow stems, but further into the stand where it doesn't get so much light, they tend to be more of a green colour. So the sunlight really brings out that lovely colour. We're actually going to control this one a little bit as well during the winter, because if you were to track some of the roots, they almost go as far out as the Montbretia. They've run under the ground and started to pop up the other side. So given half a chance, they'll be covering this whole bank in another 10 years' time. So we're actually going to dig around, separate this one out again, bring it under control and put the barrier in place. We put in a mixture of South American plants for interest, usually sort of in the spring and summer. Some will be later. There's a mixture in there. We've got some more crinodendron. This is crinodendron in the front of us. You can see just a few of the lanterns, called the lantern tree. Flowers in the sort of summer months, and obviously there's a few flowers still left on at this time of year. But we've also planted some white form of this, which is called crinodendron patagua. So that'll flower, but with the white flowers at a similar time, and fill up the area sort of directly behind. And further up in there we've also planted some azara. Azara is rather nice for spring interest. It has little yellow flowers, scented yellow flowers, and they're serrated, very fresh green, lime green leaves. So we planted in some Azara patagoniensis further in behind. So they'll give later interest in a few years' time in the spring, to create a little bit of scent around that area. And we'll do more planting in and around the Chilean coombe over the next few years. And I'd like to get some more of this particular Chilean plant in behind us. This is Jebuina avellana, or the Chilean hazel. You can see it has these lovely flowers at this time of the year. It's an interesting tree, it's an evergreen, so you'll always have this lovely foliage. It has these soft, new sort of foliage that comes through all through the year, which is rather nice. It had this lovely sort of weeping form, and it will layer itself. So there are several layers in amongst here, and then it sends another stem up. So it's got that sort of perpetuating motion, but it's a lovely, lovely tree. It does have fruits. They're a bit like but agapanthus is always important with agapanthus to keep them nice and sort of tight and root restricted, because they do flower that much better.
In a pot, for example.
Pot's brilliant because that'll do the trick, and they really do flower that much better if they're restricted or if they're in a big old clump.
Well, we've got a big old clump in a pot, and all it's done is thrown up 3 flowers, you know.
Yeah, that's probably about as good as you're going to get. Agapanthus don't traditionally produce a lot of flowers in that size. Once it's sort of 3 or 4 times that size, you will get more flowers.
But not
it's nice to see how this area has come together, and this is something to look out for when you come back in the spring. Obviously this is a mass of colour in the spring with the evergreen azaleas, or rhododendrons as they've all been reclassified, starting from sort of whites through to pinks through to reds. So this whole area is massed out, and eventually in a few years' time they'll all meld together. What we have done with these, and once they've flowered in the spring, is we'll shear these back. People often think, and you often see when you see an evergreen azalea that's been sheared right back, you see how well they flower. The more you shear them back, the more little buds and flower buds you'll get to form, and the more flowers. So if you really want to get a really good display from your evergreen azaleas, it's a good idea to bring some of these back. So you can literally just take some of these back into the actual plant itself to encourage more.
What time of the year?
You normally prune these back after they finish flowering. So you want to bring these right back down, and then you can just literally get a pair of shears and just shear them over after they finish flowering, and you'll get then another series of shoots forming on each of those, probably 3 or 4 shoots, and they'll shoot again. So you'll get all those areas to flower off, so you get more surface area. So let's say when you see azaleas that have been sheared back really hard, you really will notice they're completely covered in flowers. You can't see any of the leaves. They really do produce an amazing display. So, and it'll encourage them to thicken out and move sideways, and as I say, grow together and form just a big mat of colour in this area. We've got the Hoheria planted up behind. This is the Hoheria stylosa, the one I was talking about earlier, which is rather nice. And these are forming a good sort of backdrop and a bit of a screen as well. They're evergreen, so they'll form a good screen behind and a bit of protection. There's also Eucryphia, some young Eucryphia in behind, which flowers, say, through from sort of August into September, and there's some flowering just on the bank there. They look like a bit like a camellia-like flower, and you've probably seen them growing in other gardens around, and they'll form a nice big screen along with the Hoheria as well. So a good sort of mixture of colour and interest in here. And also there's a magnolia just along here, used to be formerly Michelia, Felsopa silver cloud. You can see again, as with a lot of the magnolias, you get a few rogue flowers at this time of the year. It's a lovely scented magnolia, this particular one. And in time it will make a tree the size of the big magnolia campbellii at the top of the chilling coombe, so it will make a very large tree. But perfectly placed with the azaleas around, giving lower colour. Yeah, so Gunnerer, we tend to sort of prune these back once you get through into October time, so we'll trim all the leaves off, just cover them up, just to tidy them up really. You don't really need to do an awful lot of protection with Gunnerer really in Cornwall. The only thing you may get is the odd sort of damage to the leaves in the spring when they start to produce the leaves, around about sort of March time. Sometimes you get a late frost. But any time that's happened to these in the past, we've just chopped the leaves off and a new set of leaves have been produced, so it hasn't really been a real problem. Another good example of an area we've cleared. Forgive me if you've already heard this story, but we've actually cleared this area a few years ago. Again, as part of the clearance of the rhododendron ponticum, planted up a collection of loderi rhododendrons and also rhododendron crusum, the scented rhododendron, in the foreground. The loderis are good size plants, really lovely scent to them. Big sort of blousy, pinkish flushed white flowers, and then the crassum is a lovely white, late flowering rhododendron, usually flowers in sort of June, even into July, so it's a good late flower, and it has a lovely scent, really gorgeously scented rhododendrons. So in time these will form a nice group planting together, and we'll then clear a little bit more out from along here of the laurel, and we'll perhaps remove every other one to give them more space, but obviously have the established plants that'll get away much quicker. So really an exciting collection of Loderites this. Some of them you wouldn't see down here. These are all sourced from a nursery up in London. So as I say, exciting collection for us, and will give good interest in a few years' time. And they don't, usually within about 4 or 5 years they'll start to flower, and then they'll be quite impressive. So you don't have to literally wait for them to get 15, 20 foot high before they flower. They will flower on reasonably young plants. One of my particular favourites, and something we've planted a lot more of over the years, are the Hedychiums, or the ginger lilies. We've got several different varieties and different species of the Hedychium. We've got Hedychium forestii and spicatum. This is spicatum down here. You can see the flowers. They're quite a delicate flower, but rather nice to have a light scent to them. Some of them are more scented. Hedychium gardnerianum is particularly well scented yellow form, which is a really good one to seek out. But they have a lovely sort of lush form to the leaves, very Trebah-esque plant. Do well down in the southwest. In the water garden, or if you're around and about, we've actually sort of listed everything at different times of the year. You'll see some of the. There's the Hedychium. Spelling of Hedychium is on the board. So if you
want to check up on you.
So you've got the Hedychium there, Gardnerianum, which is probably the most scented of all of the Hedychiums. There's one just flowering down at the bridge at the moment, but there's some further up in the water garden which will probably come into flower. Rudbeckia is looking good at the moment. We'll see that as we wander back up through the water garden itself. It gives a nice bit of summer colour. So, do you want to follow me?
Is there any common names for the button?
You've got forestii, spicatum, and also you've got the Hedychium, the particular good one, the Gardnerianum, which is just sending up some flower spikes down below. But it has this fantastic leaf, which I think really does, it's a sort of very banana-like, very lush, tropical leaf. Really suits this particular area with all the moisture. It loves the moisture that sort of we've had this year. It doesn't seem to be bothered at all by the wet. And then obviously you've got the Rudbeckia flowering down to the water garden, along with a few of the other sort of plants at this time of year, including the Hedychiums and also a few of the salvias. But just looking behind you, another particularly nice hydrangea. If you've got a bit of space, you can see this one's obviously taken over. It can be cut back quite hard. This is hydrangea aspera from the Velosa group of hydrangeas. It has a lovely felty, soft feel to the leaves, and a very delicate flower, which really sort of stands out nicely against those leaves at this time of year. Also, we were just talking a little bit about some of the bromeliads that are flowering. This is Fascicularia bicolour, just in this pot here. It's been left in that pot. It hasn't been watered once. Okay, we haven't had so much of a problem this year, but the last few summers it hasn't been watered ever. So this plant's never been watered with a watering can, so it just goes to show how resistant it is to drought. So a really good plant on a very dry, sunny bank. Equally, it'll grow in a little bit of shade, but if you want to get these flowers, it really needs a good sort of sunny position. The leaves are actually, they actually have adapted to change colour when the flower starts to form. We do bring these in as a precautionary measure in the winter. We've learnt our lesson over the last few winters, so we'll bring these in, we'll put these up and just put them in a cold glass house. We won't give it any heat. But just as much to keep the wet off them as anything really. And obviously a lot of the succulents, they'll tolerate a certain amount of wet, but the combination of the wet and the cold are the two sort of worst enemies for the succulents. So we'll lift a lot of these and bring these in, but it's lovely to see them getting bigger and bigger each year. And we actually divided a lot of these up and planted the rest of them down on the bank just below the hydrangeas as you go down off the edge of lawn path and on the right hand side. Okay, well I'd like to thank you all for joining me this morning. It's been a lovely morning. Glad that you brought the sunshine with you. As I say, we'll probably do another sort of walk and talk. I was hoping to do possibly one in the autumn, or it may move through into the sort of new year. Obviously we've got the New Year walk, so we'll probably aim for that. And I could talk a little bit more about some of the plants that we put in through the winter, because we're doing quite a bit more planting in the next sort of couple of months or so, and a few developments which we hope to start work on as well, which we can perhaps talk about a little bit nearer the time, because you'll see some of the work that has gone on over that time. So I'll let you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, as I say, for joining me this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.